Hey guys, tonight we take a quiet stroll into the desert winds of ancient Nubia, where the Nile curves like a sleeping serpent and the sand hums with forgotten whispers. You're standing barefoot on warm sun-baked soil, not far from a village hidden behind palms and carved mud brick shrines. The air is thick with incense. Drums pulse faintly in the background, like a heartbeat underwater. And ahead of you, a slow-moving procession of priestesses walking into the shallows of the river, their arms lined with small, dark symbols, like quiet sentences written on the skin. They are not warriors, not dancers, not decoration. They are healers. And the ink on their skin, it's medicine. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing still, but everything else seems to move: the ripples of water, the sway of linen skirts, the shimmer of obsidian tools laid out beside the river like a surgical tray from 3,000 years ago. It turns out ancient Nubians weren't just painting bodies for beauty. No, they were crafting cures, one dot at a time. One of the women catches your eye. Her arms are painted with honey and soot, and she carries a small leather pouch slung low on her back. Inside, freshly ground herbs, heated resin, and a whisper of copper ingredients meant to coax the spirit of healing through the skin and into the bone. She kneels beside another woman lying on a mat, already marked with faint circles near her stomach. A birth ritual, a healing rite. You can't tell yet, but you stay quiet. The ink isn't just applied, it's summoned. Mainstream scholars agree Nubian tattooing likely predates the Egyptian dynasties. The earliest evidence appears not on statues or scrolls, but on skin itself. Mummified bodies, pulled from dry sands, their arms and torsos etched with symbols that don't match decorative trends. They're functional, clinical even. One body discovered near Gebel Adda bears a repeating cross-shaped motif along the lower spine. Historians suggest it may have been a remedy for chronic pain, sort of like an ancient prescription, just with more bleeding. Now here's the fringe bit. Some scholars argue that these tattoos acted like an energetic lock, meant to trap wandering spirits believed to cause pain. Because apparently, even back then, the concept of your back pain being caused by a ghost was more comforting than blaming your mattress. Others go further, connecting the ink patterns to the stars, suggesting astrological alignments were consulted before each poke. Imagine needing a good horoscope before getting a tattoo for joint inflammation. And then there's you, watching this whole thing unfold while trying not to flinch. Because here comes the obsidian blade, a flat, glassy chip sharper than any modern scalpel. It's dipped in a thick solution made from burnt date pits, donkey's milk, and crushed medicinal roots. Smells awful. works better than it should. The healer mutters something under her breath. A plea to the river goddess, a chant of precision. Maybe she's just trying to remember the patient's birthday. We'll never know. The first incision is shallow, just enough to open the skin, like soft fruit. Then comes the tap, 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 gentle strikes with a bone needle, the ink driven deep into the dermis. You wince, but the woman on the mat barely moves. She's been here before, maybe dozens of times. To her, this is routine maintenance, like oiling a squeaky hinge or offering your joints a motivational speech via puncture wound. Here's something else. The Nubians believed in layers. Tattooing wasn't just a one-time thing. Symbols were added seasonally, much like renewing a medical subscription. Got knee pain again. Time to reapply your spiral of strength. Worried about fever. Add a triangle near your chest and hope the gods got the memo. Historians still argue whether this was strictly medical or deeply religious, or both. Was the ink believed to soothe nerve endings or align you with divine frequencies? No one agrees. And honestly, the answer might be somewhere in between, because in ancient Nubia, the physical and the spiritual weren't two separate worlds. They were the same hot, dusty, unpredictable world. And sometimes that world gave you boils, which needed a good tattooing. You squint at the pattern being tapped into the woman's thigh. It's not symmetrical. It zigzags like a scarab's trail. The healer pauses, wipes the blood with a cloth made of woven reeds, then sprinkles the spot with ash and speaks a word that sounds suspiciously like heal and seal combined. Even the tools are sacred. That needle isn't just a stick. It's carved from the femur of a sacred cow that once drank from the Nile during the flood season. And yes, they'll tell you that matters. But here's the final touch. When it's all done, they press a clay seal over the wound, a warm, earthy bandage etched with a personal sigil. It's part medical dressing, part energy stamp, like if your Band-Aid had a zodiac sign. And just like that, you step back, letting the healer finish. A few more dots, a slow breath, a short prayer, then silence. The woman rises, stretches her arms, and walks away, like she just came out of a spa. A spa where you get stabbed with enchanted twigs and leave with a magical infection barrier. You look down at your own arms, suddenly aware of their blankness. Clean, unmarked, unprotected, vulnerable. And in that moment you wonder not whether the tattoos worked, but whether anyone will ever ink you with the same care, precision, and ancestral hope. You follow the priestesses back from the riverbank, the soft slap of wet footprints on baked earth leading toward a shaded compound ringed with woven fencing. Here, the tattooing doesn't stop. It continues in quieter rooms, dimly lit by slits in the mud brick. You duck your head beneath a lintel carved with lotus shapes and find yourself inside a space that smells like blood, soot, and mint. In this room, skin isn't just skin. It's a scroll, a message board, a living record of ailments, cures, and prayers. And someone's about to write a new chapter on it. The woman lying on the woven mat in front of you isn't a priestess nor a noble. She's older, a grandmother. Her fingers curl slightly from years of pounding millet, and her shoulders are tattooed with faded concentric circles like rings on an ancient tree. Each mark tells a story: a fever at 15, a miscarriage at 25, a stomach parasite at 40. You don't need a diagnosis chart, you just read her. The healer preparing the ink has already begun mixing a thick black paste soot from burnt sycamore bark, goat milk, ground carob pods, and a small pinch of powdered blue stone. Some believe the blue wards off spirits. Others think it just looks nice. Historians still argue whether these ingredients had active antimicrobial effects, or if the true power lay in the ritual. A few brave biochemists tried replicating the paste. Let's just say it didn't clear FDA trials, but it made their labs smell like burnt trail mix and regret. And yet, somehow, people healed. The tattoo begins on the woman's left hip. Not random. That's where she says the pain lives. Deep, burning, untrustworthy pain that comes and goes like a cruel joke. The healer touches the spot gently, listening not just to words, but to breath, temperature, rhythm. Then comes the marking stick, a flat edge rubbed with charcoal to draw the outline before cutting. A spiral open on one side. The design mimics the way wind coils and vanishes, a symbol meant to encourage the illness to leave. You wonder how they knew these shapes. No textbooks, no diagrams. Just centuries of trial error and listening to the body like a whispering ghost. And yet they made connections modern physicians still debate, like the idea that pain radiates and that treating its origin point matters more than treating the symptom. Then comes the poking. It's methodical, rhythmic, almost meditative. You find yourself lulled by the repetition. Tap, breathe, tap, wipe, tap again. The healer never breaks her rhythm. She could be making bread or weaving cloth, but she's embedding medicine. With every dot, a story is punctuated. A plea to the gods is sealed beneath the surface. And the symbols, oh, the symbols. Mainstream researchers once dismissed them as tribal decoration. But now, thanks to advances in dermal archaeology, yes, that's a thing we've realized, that many follow repeating patterns based on body zones. One fascinating study found identical tattoos on women buried miles apart, each bearing the same spine-length dotted line. A spinal pathway, a pain route. Historians still argue. But here's a quirk. Some marks appear on only one half of the body, like treating a problem on the left ankle by tattooing the right wrist. Sounds wild. Not if you've ever heard of reflexology. Apparently, ancient Nubians were practicing whole-body correlation long before modern acupuncture charts were cool. You glance back at the old woman. She hasn't flinched once. Maybe because she knows something you don't. Maybe because she's already survived more than most. Or maybe because the pain of tattooing is gentler than the pain it replaces. The healer finishes with a line of tiny dots encircling the spiral like a moat protecting a castle. She sprinkles the area with ground calendula petals and hums softly. Not a chant, a lullaby. And here's something to remember. These tattoos aren't just therapeutic, they're diagnostic. Healers would sometimes mark a suspected source of illness, then observe, over time, did the swelling go down? Did sleep return? Did the patient's walking improve? The ink acted like a litmus test. If one mark failed, another would be added, like trying different keys on a lock. You touch your own stomach, thinking about all the times you've felt something wrong but couldn't explain it. In Nubia, they'd tattoo your belly and wait. Not for test results, but for the body to speak. And it usually did. Now here comes a strange twist. Travelers from Egypt sometimes wrote about these tattoos, but through clenched jaws. Primitive, they'd say, and unsightly. But then some of them got the tattoos anyway, quietly, especially those who fell ill in the heat and found local medicine more effective than imported amulets. One Greek merchant wrote about a liver-shaped mark applied with bitter smoke that cured him of the humors of swamp fever. He also wrote that the process felt like being pecked by angry gods. But hey, he lived. You smile. Some things never change. Foreigners arrive, scoff at the locals, then beg them for help. And ink. Lots of ink. Outside the hut you hear someone calling another patient arriving. But you're not ready to leave. Not yet. Because you've started to see the skin differently, not as something to decorate, but as a ledger, a living chart, a space where pain is recorded, healed, and remembered. You look again at the grandmother. She's sitting upright now, sipping date tea. The new tattoo glistens faintly in the light. She smiles at you like she knows a secret. And maybe she does. Because in a world without x-rays or ultrasounds, without pills or hospitals, this was medicine. Quiet, ritualistic, rooted in community and memory, and inked directly into the body. You step out of the tattooing hut into the soft glare of midday, where the heat shimmers off the sand like a breath held too long. The healer's courtyard bustles with quiet urgency. Goats bleating softly near the fence, a child balancing a pot on her head, and a man sitting on a stool with one leg stretched forward, waiting his turn. He looks strong, like someone who's spent decades carving fields out of riverbanks, but his ankle is wrapped in reed fibers, and he's biting the inside of his cheek. You sit near him, and without a word he nods to the tools he's next. This is the part where the needles meet bone. The instruments laid out beside the healer today are different than before. Longer, needles, obsidian shards, ground to wickedly fine points, and small animal bones shaped like flat spatulas. You'd think you're in a butcher's toolkit, except the goal here is healing, not slicing dinner. The process begins again. The healer, older this time, with lines so deep they seem tattooed, themselves leans over the man's ankle. She asks no questions. She just watches how he moves, how he breathes when she touches the joint. Then she mutters, something dips a thin sliver of reed into black ink and begins to draw. You think she's sketching a beetle, but no, it's a stylized scarab, a symbol of rebirth, transformation, and endurance. Historians agree the scarab motif was widely used throughout Nubia and Egypt, but its application in healing tattoos is less understood. Some believe it was tied to regeneration of joints and blood. Others think it was a protective agent against repetitive injury, like an early version of kinesiology tape, except permanent and way cooler looking. Here comes the poking again, but different this time. Slower, deeper. You can hear the crunch of dry skin being punctured and the occasional hiss of breath escaping clenched teeth. The man never cries out. Not once. You get the sense that to show pain here would be like insulting the process. Still, the room feels reverent. There's no rush, no production line. Just the careful, repeated rhythm of ink meeting skin, and here's a surprise: tattoos weren't done in silence. As the healer works, another woman begins to tap a shallow drum, not loud, but insistent, like a second heartbeat. It's not background music. It's part of the ritual. Scholars have noted that certain tattooing sessions included drumming chants or whispered stories suggesting a belief that sound vibrations help direct the ink's purpose. Healing isn't just visual, it's sonic. The drum is for the spirits, or maybe for the immune system. Historians still argue whether the sounds were spiritual guidance or just a way to keep the patient from passing out. You lean closer. The scarab now has wings, thin lines flaring out toward the shin, and beneath it, a tiny cluster of dots positioned precisely along the tendon. This is where the pain lives, and where the ink must do its work. But there's another layer here: intent. The healer isn't just following a pattern, she's tailoring the symbol, adjusting wing shapes based on the man's past injuries, changing ink thickness depending on how the skin reacts. This isn't a stencil job, it's bespoke medicine, a kind of spiritual surgery done with soot patience and hands steady as river stones. And here's the quirky part. Some accounts describe healers licking the inked spot after finishing, not out of some unhygienic impulse, but as a final blessing, transferring life force through the tongue, sealing the work with the breath. One Greek traveler was horrified to see this. Another wrote that it gave him chills in both soul and lower spine, which might be the most dramatic way to say, felt kind of sacred, not gonna lie. After the final dot is tapped, the healer rubs a warm salve made from fig resin and goose fat into the tattoo. It smells complex, but the man exhales, and you can see the tension melt from his shoulders. Not cured, maybe, but comforted. And that's half the battle. You start to notice a pattern in the positioning of the tattoos. Ankles, knees, lower back, always near joints, pressure points, or along muscles. This isn't random artistry, it's proto-anatomy. They understood structure, They mapped pain the way you'd map stars, slowly, patiently, and with a lot of staring. Modern researchers speculate that Nubian healers may have had a working understanding of muscle chains, or at least an intuitive sense of cause and effect. A hurt shoulder could mean a tight neck. A painful foot might trace back to the calf. Sound familiar? It should. That's basically sports medicine now. But they were doing it with ash and bone in the open air, with no latex gloves in sight. And here's where things get even weirder. Some tattoos were meant to activate, meaning you didn't just get poked and forget it. You had to rub the spot weekly, or heat it over smoke, or chant to it, like maintaining a sacred engine under your skin. Scholars still debate whether this was about keeping the ink fresh, recharging the spell, or just something the healer said to keep patients coming back. Either way, you're impressed. As the man stands, his newly inked scarab glistens. He nods at the healer, then at you, and limps out into the light. Lighter, somehow, carved, transformed. You remain behind, suddenly aware that in Nubia, the line between medicine and magic isn't blurry, it's non-existent. Healing is magic. Magic is medicine. And pain. Pain is just a messenger waiting for the right mark. You feel the urge to press your fingers to your own ankle, not because it hurts, but because for the first time you understand it might be speaking. The sky above Nubia deepens into late afternoon amber, and you walk beside the Nile as the light turns syrupy and the air begins to settle. The river is low this time of year, its surface broken by papyrus stalks and crocodile eyes that blink slowly like guardians of the past. The tattooing grounds grow quiet now, but your mind is restless, tugged toward a question that's lingered since you arrived. Why did they believe tattoos could heal? And more curiously, what did they think caused illness in the first place? In ancient Nubia, getting sick wasn't just a matter of catching a bad fish or sleeping in the wrong breeze. No pain had personality. Illness had intention. Sometimes it was the wrath of a god. Sometimes it was the ghost of a jealous ancestor. And sometimes your favorite, it was a wandering spirit that mistook your liver for a cozy sleeping spot. They didn't separate the physical and the spiritual, not even slightly. You weren't a body with a soul. You were a soul made temporarily inconvenient by having a body. That's where tattoos came in. These weren't random scrawls meant to scare off demons. Well, not just that. Each mark was part of a conversation with the unseen. The act of tattooing was an appeal to divine forces, a way of saying, "Hey, I know something's out of balance, so I'm drawing this diagram of my suffering in case you're interested in fixing it." One mainstream belief centered around Ma'at, the idea of cosmic balance not just in Egypt, but also absorbed and adapted by Nubian culture. When balance was broken by a lie, a crime, a poorly buried ancestor, illness could manifest. The cure, a physical correction, a visible mark, balance through ink. You arrive at a shrine, not grand like a temple, but quietly revered. A squat stone structure covered in faded carvings. You peer at the wall and make out a curious scene. A figure holding a blade standing over another figure with rays coming out of their body. Some interpret this as surgery. Others think it's a symbolic tattooing scene, healing by marking. Historians still argue whether these carvings depict literal rituals or cosmological metaphors. But to you, it feels both, always both. There's a small basin filled with ochre powder beside the entrance. Pilgrims dip their fingers and dot their foreheads or shoulders with the red dust. Temporary tattoos, you realize. It's a gesture, a placeholder, until something more permanent is needed. You try it. The ochre smells like iron and warm dirt. You dot your wrist and feel noticed. Here's the quirky bit. Some Nubians believed that pain could travel. You might feel it in your chest, but it began in your leg, or it started as heartbreak and settled into your knees. Tattooing wasn't about chasing symptoms, it was about tracing the pain's journey. And sometimes it meant marking where it would go next in case you wanted to block it off at the pass, like laying traps for discomfort. You take a seat near the shrine, the stone still warm from the sun. An old man nearby speaks softly to a group of children. He points to his own chest, where a faded spiral sits just above the heart, and tells them the story of a time he almost died from sorrow. His wife passed during childbirth, and his chest felt crushed for weeks. No breath, no appetite, no laughter. The healer didn't give him herbs. She gave him this spiral tattoo during a lunar eclipse, when the goddess of grief was said to be at her gentlest. Mainstream historians once dismissed stories like this as superstition, but lately there's been a shift. New research in the field of psychodermatology. A real thing. Promise suggests a link between emotional trauma and skin disorders. It seems ancient Nubians didn't wait for the science. They just listened to the body's poetry. You think of modern tattoos, anchors, names, butterflies over scars. We still do it. We still ink pain into meaning. Here's another odd detail. Many of the healing tattoos followed river paths. That is, they mimicked the Nile's bends and branches. Spirals, forks long lines with tiny offshoots. Why? Some say they believed the body mirrored the landscape. The bloodstream was the river. The nerves were reeds. Ink helped redirect the flood. Beautiful rite historians still argue if that metaphor was ever verbalized or if we're just projecting. But either way, you feel it now. The Nile flows inside you. The sun dips low shadows, stretching like cats. You rise and walk again, passing women gathered with baskets, many of them tattooed along the collarbone or the nape of the neck. These were common places to mark for protection, guarding the vulnerable, the exposed. Not unlike our modern vaccines, just more stylish. You wonder what it must have felt like to believe so deeply in the meaning of your skin. Every mark a map, every pain a message, every recovery a story etched forever You touch the ochre dot on your wrist again. It's already fading, but somehow you know the memory won't. The wind picks up, carrying the smell of burning wood and crushed leaves. Somewhere a healer is mixing ink for tomorrow, and you keep walking, drawn deeper into a world where healing meant ink belief and a willingness to hurt just a little, to feel whole again. Evening slides in, like ink, in water, slow staining, unstoppable. The horizon cools from gold to violet, and the tattooing compound takes on a quieter tone. Children have been sent indoors. The goats have stopped bleeding. Even the river seems to hush itself. But inside a reed-walled hut near the edge of the village, there is still work to be done. You step in gently and immediately feel the shift. This room is different, softer, scented with frankincense and bitter herbs. Candles flicker in carved clay dishes, casting long shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, a young woman lies on a padded mat, her knees drawn up her belly, partially exposed. A midwife sits beside her mixing something in a small bowl, thick, dark, and earthy smelling. This isn't just healing. This is women's magic. Midwives in ancient Nubia weren't simply birth assistants. They were intimate body historians. They knew every ache that came with womanhood, the monthly punishments, the dangerous blessings of childbirth, the bruises of unwanted attention, the slow changes of menopause, and they had a toolkit that modern OB-GYNs would blink twice at. At the top of that list, therapeutic tattoos. The young woman isn't visibly pregnant. You realize with a subtle ache of recognition that this might be preparation, preventative tattooing. Ink, not for now, but for soon. Maybe she's planning to conceive. Maybe she's had trouble. Maybe she's scared. Whatever the case, the midwife treats her not as a patient, but as a co-creator of her own fate. She begins by brushing the woman's belly with warm oil infused with date flowers, fenugreek, and powdered copper. The smell is both metallic and sweet. Then she uses a carved stick to draw a small leaf-like pattern just below the navel. It's elegant, delicate, and absolutely loaded with meaning. Mainstream historians once assumed belly tattoos were decorative, but now we know better. Radiographs of mummified women from the region have revealed ink markings near the uterus, spirals, triangles, and dots that match traditional fertility symbols. And they appear far more frequently on women who lived into middle or old age, suggesting they may have been part of reproductive health rituals. Historians still argue whether these tattoos served actual physiological purposes, perhaps stimulating circulation, or whether their power was purely symbolic. Either way, the women believed, and belief is half the cure. The midwife dips her stylus into the ink, not black this time, reddish-brown mixed from ochre clove ash and camel's blood. It dries brighter. It's considered more awake, more likely to call the attention of benevolent spirits. You glance down at your own hand. Nothing, just bare skin. In this room that feels a bit like showing up to a royal dinner in a towel, the tattooing begins, not deep, not as aggressive as the joint work you've seen earlier. This is more like layering etching into the shallow dermis. The midwife hums as she works her song, rising and falling like the rhythm of waves. You realize she's syncing her movement with the woman's breath, tapping in time with each exhale. Not just ASMR ancestral synchronization. Quirky fact. Some old Nubian texts suggest that tattoos placed during certain lunar phases were more effective. Fertility marks, especially, were done during waxing moons, symbols for growth and fullness. The full moon, meanwhile, was considered too loud, too powerful. A bad time to plant or poke. You glance at the young woman's face. She's serene, resolute. She knows the sting is part of the process. Pain here is not punishment, it's participation. You imagine explaining this at a modern clinic. Yes, we'll just tattoo your uterus gently while whispering at the moon. You can already hear the insurance denial. But in this world, it makes perfect sense. When the midwife finishes, she rubs the mark with a cooling paste made from tamarind pulp and honey. Then she places a smooth stone carved with a sun symbol directly over the fresh tattoo. It's warm to the touch, charged in fire earlier. She holds it there for several heartbeats, murmuring something soft. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic spiritual or simply a kind of thermal therapy. Some say the heat was meant to wake the ink. Others suggest it closed the pores. Or maybe it just felt good. Your guess is as good as theirs. But what's clear is the tenderness in the ritual. There's no embarrassment here. No shame. No modesty frantically preserved with paper gowns. Just shared womanhood and ancient trust. You realize you're witnessing something rare. Healthcare that's intimate, intuitive, and deeply poetic. Outside a bird calls. The candles flicker low. The midwife helps the young woman sit up, offers her warm goat milk sweetened with date syrup, and gently lays a cloth over her belly. There's no chart to update, no prescription to fill, just one final whisper. You are ready now. You leave the hut slowly, heart fuller than when you entered. And as you walk back into the deepening dusk, you can't help but think, maybe healing isn't just what you do to the body. Maybe it's what you invite the body to believe. Maybe that ink wasn't about making her fertile. Maybe it was about helping her believe she already was. The stars begin to needle their way into the Nubian sky, tiny pinpricks of white in the indigo canvas above. It feels right somehow, that tonight's theme is ink and needles, and now the heavens are joining in. You sit near a cluster of woven mats, your body warm from the day's sun, and your thoughts linger on a simple but strangely profound truth you've uncovered in ancient Nubia. The location of pain determined the location of ink. Not metaphorically, literally. A headache meant tattoos on the temples. A twisted ankle meant dots clustered around the Achilles tendon. Back pain, a spine-length line, sometimes symmetrical, sometimes broken into stair-step shapes. There's a quiet genius in this, the idea that the body tells you exactly where to help it, and the ink just follows instructions. Tonight the healer is working on an older man. You recognize him from earlier in the week. He walks with a limp and always carries a curved walking stick that looks older than he is. When he removes his outer robe, you see lines of faded ink already stretching across his lower back like ancient contour lines on a weathered map. He lies face down, exposes his left leg, and waits. The healer begins with a touch, not a blade. She presses along the calf muscle, listening with her fingers. Then she nods and draws a short vertical line near the back of the knee. It seems arbitrary to you. Why not tattoo directly on the calf where the pain lives? But then you notice something every time she touches that spot. The old man flinches slightly. Mainstream medicine eventually gave it a name: referred pain. Ancient Nubians just knew it worked. Historians now hypothesize that this tattoo mapping was a precursor to both reflexology and acupuncture. While there's no surviving medical text outlining the system, patterns in mummy remains suggest consistency. Ankles tied to hips, wrists linked to digestion. You begin to realize this was a full body diagram passed down through generations, not on papyrus, but through calloused hands and punctured skin. And here's where it gets quirky. Some inkings were done on body parts that weren't in pain on purpose. The idea was to redirect the illness, like diverting a river away from a flooded village. A sick liver ink the shoulder. A dry throat mark the tops of the feet. You raise your eyebrow, but remember, modern acupuncturists do the same thing. They just charge you $90 and give you a cup of ginger tea afterward. The ink for tonight's session is mixed with ash from burnt pomegranate, skin, goat urine. Yes, you heard that right. And crushed carob seeds. Pomegranate for circulation. Carob for its cooling effect. Goat urine. Because, well, historians still argue whether that one had a chemical purpose or was simply tradition too stubborn to question. The tattoo design is deceptively simple. 2 parallel lines bracketing the back of the knee. Between them, a series of 5 dots. Each dot is spaced exactly 2 finger widths apart. The healer uses no ruler, just experience. You can see her eyes narrow slightly with focus, her breathing slow. This isn't just art, it's alignment. Each tap of the needle sinks ink with intent, and after each set of dots, she pauses, not to rest, but to let the body accept the mark. A moment for the skin to breathe. Some modern dermal researchers believe this pause reduces inflammation and allows better pigment settling. Ancient Nubians just called it courtesy. And then comes the moment you didn't expect. She speaks, not to the patient, not to you, but to the ink. She whispers something in Old Nubian, something lost to you, but clearly meaningful. It's soft, rhythmic, like coaxing a shy animal, the way a gardener might speak to a seed before covering it with soil. Later, you ask about it, and someone tells you the ink won't know where to go unless it hears its purpose. You nod slowly. Of course. What else would you expect from a culture that gave voice to pain and body to belief? As the session ends, the old man sits up slowly. He doesn't smile, but he nods once. A deep, grateful gesture. Then he pulls his robe back over the fresh marks and with effort rises to leave. You stay behind staring at the tools. Each one has its own wear, its own history. The bone handle, smooth from years of grip. The stone bowl, stained with layers of pigment. You imagine how many lives they've touched, how many stories they've written on skin. Then you notice something strange. A girl, maybe 10 years old, stepping up shyly, with her foot outstretched. There's no injury you can see, no wince. But the healer nods, takes her hand, guides her to sit. The girl whispers something in her ear, and the healer chuckles. A preventative mark, a protection tattoo, for growing bones for long journeys, or maybe just for courage. The healer draws a tiny fish beside the ankle. One tap, then another. You realize that even when it doesn't hurt yet, Nubians believed in preparing the body to be well. You leave the hut as the stars above multiply. The night air is cool now, brushing your face like a silk scarf. Your own skin itches faintly, not from a wound, but from awareness. You've been watching these people listen to pain map it and rewrite it. And suddenly your own body feels like a quiet manuscript, blank, waiting, and ready to be understood. The moon hangs higher now, round silent and watchful, casting silver reflections across the Nile, like threads of a loom, slowly weaving the night. You find yourself walking along a narrow dirt path that leads away from the main village, guided only by the soft crunch of sand under your feet and the smell of something burning gently in the distance. Resin, maybe, or old sandalwood. You're told you're going to see something special tonight, something that explains the why behind the symbols, the reason they chose crocodiles and spirals instead of flowers and suns. Because here, motif matters. You arrive at a small clearing where 3 healers sit cross-legged around a low fire. No patience, no pain tonight, just lore. One of them, the eldest, is carving a design into the dirt with a stick. You peer over and see what looks like a strange spiral dotted along the edge, with a triangle emerging from one side like a tiny mountain rising from a whirlpool. This, she says softly, is the mark for returning breath. You blink. It's beautiful, sure. But breath, she explains. When a person suffers from breathing, troubles, coughs, choking spells, breathlessness, the spiral draws the air inward. The triangle lifts it toward the throat. The dotted edge tells the body to keep the air moving. And suddenly it clicks. These are more than pretty shapes. These are instructions. Mainstream historians now recognize that many Nubian tattoo symbols align with basic bodily functions and internal systems. Spirals for digestion, ladders for breath, waves for circulation. The crocodile. That one's especially interesting. You lean closer to the firelight and notice that two of the healers have crocodile tattoos, stylized but unmistakable, inked along their upper arms and shoulders. It turns out the crocodile wasn't just a river beast. It was an emblem of resilience. It never got sick. It could lie motionless for hours, survive extreme temperatures, and bounce back from wounds. Tattooing a crocodile on the body was a way of borrowing that strength, especially in areas prone to chronic pain or injury. The fringe theory. Some believed crocodile tattoos couldn't be burned away, meaning even in the afterlife the healing would remain, sort of like a spiritual warranty. But the symbolism doesn't end there. You're shown a figure-8 motif, two interlocking loops placed on the inner wrists or over the navel. This is the cycle mark. It tells the body, regulate, whether it's digestion, menstruation, or emotional flux. The loops are meant to mirror balance and rhythm. And interestingly, these figure-8 patterns often show up in mummies who lived remarkably long lives. Historians still argue whether it was coincidence or if the body listened. One of the healers then pulls out a smooth stone plate etched with dozens of micro-symbols, tiny suns, zigzags, triangles, spirals, teardrops. It's a kind of lexicon, a catalog of illness and intent. You can't help but think of modern medical diagrams, except these are hand-carved, worn smooth with use, and still understood centuries later. Here's the quirky bit. Some tattoo shapes doubled as social signals. A certain zigzag across the collarbone. That meant I survived the river fever. A cluster of dots on the forearm might mean I've delivered 5 children. They weren't just treatments. They were testimonies. The skin said what the tongue didn't. And then there's the taboo motifs. Some patterns were reserved, sacred, restricted to priestesses, widows, or warriors. A 7-pointed star above the breastbone, for example, signaled both spiritual protection and a warning. This person had been marked by a divine encounter, usually illness, near death, or deep grief. Tattooing it was both an honor and a reminder. It said, I've seen the other side and returned. You ask what happens if someone steals a motif, gets tattooed with something that wasn't meant for them. The healer's smile fades. Then the body will reject it, she says simply, or worse, it will believe the lie. You shiver a little, not from cold, but from the realization that in this world, your tattoos could literally confuse your body if you weren't honest. Historians still debate whether these beliefs came from empirical results, someone healed faster with the right symbol, or whether it was psychological. But then again, how different is that from taking medicine only because you believe it works? The fire crackles low now, throwing shadows on the stone symbols. The healers begin to pack up. One wraps the etching stone in soft cloth and tucks it under her arm like a sacred cookbook. You follow them quietly back toward the village, your mind swimming with patterns, with meaning. You look at your arm, blank as a page, and wonder what your body might say if it were allowed to speak in spirals and dots. What motif would it ask for? Strength like a crocodile, breath like a ladder, a spiral of recovery, or maybe, just maybe, a single line. Small, subtle, but enough to say I was here, I was broken, I healed. By morning the heat returns not angrily, but insistently. The kind of warmth that wakes you, slowly baking the earth beneath you until it gives off the scent of stone and memory. You're already at the edge of the village when someone waves you over with urgency. A burial is happening. Not a grand affair, no parade of mourners, just a quiet procession toward the necropolis on the hill. You follow. There's something heavy in the air, not grief, exactly, but weight. As the wrapped body is lowered into the ground, the silence thickens. And when the last handful of sand is placed over the chest, something unusual happens. A younger woman steps forward, unwraps a small linen pouch, and withdraws a tiny stone stylus. With practiced care, she reaches beneath the shroud, finds the bare shoulder of the deceased, and tattoos a final mark. Yes, you heard that right. They're tattooing a corpse. In Nubian custom, death was not the end of healing. In fact, it might have been the beginning of a longer journey. You watch transfixed as the woman presses a crescent-shaped symbol into the skin just below the collarbone. No ink this time, just shallow cuts later to be packed with ochre. A permanent mark for a permanent departure. Mainstream archaeologists used to overlook this. But recently, thanks to new imaging technology, dozens of burial sites have been re-evaluated, and in at least half tattooing appears to have occurred after death. Historians still argue whether this was ceremonial closure, an attempt to heal the soul, or simply a way of preparing the body to communicate with the ancestors. You'd think being dead would exempt you from further poking, but apparently Nubians had a different policy. The woman finishes, then places a round stone, a river pebble, rubbed smooth over the mark. It's engraved with 3 tiny dots. No one speaks, but the message is clear. Go in health. Later, under the shade of a thorn tree, an elder tells you that tattoos on the dead weren't for the living to see. They were messages to the divine, coordinates in a way. Some were directional spirals pointing east, signaling sunrise rebirth. Others mimicked stars aligning the body with celestial guardians. Quirky fact, in at least one burial, a woman's feet were tattooed with symbols resembling sandals. She was buried barefoot, but the marks made sure she wouldn't arrive in the afterlife unshod. Ancient Nubian logic: don't meet the gods with dirty feet. As you walk through the grave field, a pattern begins to emerge. Bodies with certain symbols appear grouped together. Warriors in one area, priestesses in another, mothers close to infants. The ink was both identity and belonging, a way to organize memory across time. Tattooing wasn't just therapy. It was a filing system for eternity. Then you see something remarkable. At the far end of the site, archaeologists have uncovered a remarkably preserved body, mummified not by design, but by accident. The dry heat and shallow grave created the perfect preservation conditions. And on this woman's skin, tattoos so clear you could trace them with your fingertip. There are 7 spiral motifs along her spine, 2 wave-shaped marks at her hips, and a row of dots arching over her shoulder blades like a necklace made of ink. It's stunning, quietly powerful. Researchers spent years decoding her. One theory is that she was a healer herself, each symbol corresponding to a treatment she mastered. Another suggests she was chronically ill, and her tattoos were cumulative, layered over time as she sought relief. Historians still debate it. Some argue she was both patient and healer, wounded and wise. And somehow that feels truest. You crouch by the dig site and peer into the earth at this woman who once walked under the same sun, bathed in the same Nile, and chose again and again to turn her pain into art. You feel a strange kinship, not just with her, but with her choices. The decision to record pain rather than hide it. To mark survival, not erase struggle. One of the dig workers hands you a notebook, flipping to a sketch of the woman's tattoos. The lines are careful, reverent. You run your eyes along the shapes and realize these marks didn't die with her. They traveled across centuries, across languages, straight into your quiet astonishment. And here's the thought that lingers as you walk back. Maybe these tattoos weren't meant to heal the body at all. Maybe they were meant to teach us how to witness it, to look at pain not with pity or fear, but with understanding, with memory, with respect. You glance up at the sky. The clouds have started to gather soft, pale smudges over the hills. Somewhere beneath them, another healer sharpens her needle. Somewhere beneath your own skin, your body remembers something it hasn't yet spoken. Maybe it's time to listen. By late afternoon, the village hums with its ordinary rhythms, grains being pounded in stone mortars, baskets being woven beneath palm frond shade, and water jugs balanced on heads like elegant terracotta crowns. But not far from the public square, in a long, narrow shelter lined with ivory-colored fabric and cooling stone benches, something far from ordinary is happening. You're about to watch a warrior be inked, not for show, not for intimidation, for endurance. He sits cross-legged, spine straight, one hand resting on the hilt of a short iron dagger, the other relaxed at his side. His skin is already a map of old marks, teeth-like patterns around the ribs, slash-like lines on his biceps, and one wide abstract glyph on his right shoulder that looks a bit like a bird mid-flight. You wonder what it all means. You don't wait long. The tattooist, different from the midwives and spirit healers you've seen, approaches with the sure, unfussy manner of a man who's inked more warriors than storms that have passed over this village. He carries no incense, no songs, no charms, just a cloth bundle of blades, ink pots, and a short reed brush for sketching. You learn that warriors receive their tattoos after specific events, surviving a battle, recovering from a near-fatal wound, killing a dangerous animal, or enduring a prolonged illness without aid. Ink here is less medicine than it is proof, and in some cases it becomes the medicine. Today's tattoo is for a wound that still aches, a spear strike just below the rib cage, months old, now healed over in scar tissue. But the pain remains ghost-like and stubborn. Modern doctors might call it nerve damage or referred trauma. The Nubians, they call it a haunting. The injury must be reminded that it lost. The motif for this mark is fierce, a zigzag line with interlocking crescents, one sharp, one soft. According to local belief, the zigzag deflects future weapons, while the crescents trap any lingering pain and seal it inside. You watch as the tattooist sketches the design in white chalky paste just below the scar, not directly on it. Never on the scar. The scar tells its story already. The ink tells what comes next. Mainstream historians long believed these were simply battle trophies, primitive machismo in pigment form. But recent research suggests otherwise. Many warrior tattoos were placed at sites of recurring pain, knees, shoulders, rib cages, and spines. And some even follow surprisingly modern anatomical lines. There's one particularly well-known mummy in Karga Oasis with a lattice of ink stretching from neck to shoulder blade, remarkably close to the path of the trapezius muscle. Coincidence, historians still argue. Back in the hut, the warrior doesn't flinch as the needlework begins, not even as the obsidian tip enters the sensitive tissue between ribs. Instead, he breathes slowly, steadily. You realize this is as much ceremony as it is procedure. Every inhale punctuates the process. Every exhale speaks to endurance. Here's something quirky. Nubian warriors were sometimes buried with ink kits beside them. Not weapons, not gold, not food. Tattoo needles, which suggests that healing was part of their job too. They weren't just fighters. They were living archives of pain management. You look around and notice several young boys watching from the doorway, eyes wide, silent, learning. The tattooist doesn't shoo them away. He lets them see, lets them understand that this ink isn't bravado. It's discipline and care and memory. After the final strike of the needle, the tattooist rubs the area with a thick, dark balm made from boiled myrrh sheep fat and powdered cactus spine. It smells brutal, but the warrior sighs like a man slipping into cool water. Then something curious happens. The tattooist steps aside, and a second man, an elder, thin as a cane, but sharp-eyed, approaches with a small clay dish. He dips 2 fingers in and gently presses over the fresh ink, not rubbing, pressing. You hear him murmur a blessing under his breath. It's not dramatic, not shouted, but it's firm. The warrior nods. He gets up, walks out, limp, slightly better than before. You're told that this second blessing is reserved only for tattoos born of survival, not decoration, not fertility, just survival. It's called a second skin vow, a belief that the ink now stands guard where the body once failed. You leave the hut last, reluctant to step back into the buzzing sunlight, because in that dim room for the first time, you saw pain rewritten as power. You saw a wound taught how to behave. You saw the human body soft, scarred, breakable, armored, in nothing more than pigment grit and quiet resolve. You touch your side gently, half wondering what mark your own body would ask for. What old injury, physical or not, deserves to be sealed in ink and told, you don't win. And under the weight of the Nubian sun, you decide next time you ache, you won't ask why it hurts. You'll ask what pattern it wants to wear. The sun is high again, painting sharp shadows on every wall, and you're seated on a woven mat beside the healer's workshop, an airy open structure with half walls made of sun-dried clay. This is where the city folk come, not warriors or midwives, not mystics or elders, just everyday people who are tired of getting their amulets stolen. You think that's a joke until it's not. The man seated beside you has a necklace of knotted string in his hands. The amulet that once hung from it is gone. Taken in the marketplace, he mutters. Not the first time. Won't be the last. It held a piece of blue stone shaped like an eye, meant to ward off illness and jealousy. But now, gone. And so he's here, to get something that can't be snatched. The tattooist today is young. Too young, you think, until he starts working. His hands are steady, fast. He dips a reed into deep black ink charcoal vinegar and mashed prickly pear seed and begins sketching on the man's chest. A familiar shape, the eye symbol. But this version is adapted, stretched, slightly mirrored on both sides of the sternum. A double ward, not just protection, but symmetrical defense. The idea is simple. Charms get lost. Tattoos don't. Mainstream historians now recognize that Nubians were among the first cultures to consistently use tattoos as amulets. While jewelry and fabric charms existed, the permanent mark was the only guarantee. One scholar calls it portable sanctity. Another, more dramatically, calls it skin-locked sorcery. You personally prefer the term theft-proof protection. But it wasn't just about security. The act of transferring a charm from object to skin changed its relationship to the body. A pendant protects you from something. A tattoo protects you through something. It fuses with your flesh, becomes part of your story. The man now getting inked has a list of ailments he's hoping to avoid: stomach upset, fever, envy. The first two are medical. The last one, psychological or magical. depending on who you ask. But here's where it gets quirky. Envy was treated as an actual condition, not a moral flaw, but a disease carried by glances and whispers. And it didn't just hurt feelings. It made your hair fall out, made your goats miscarry, made your bread refuse to rise. So you protected yourself from it. Tattoo patterns for warding off envy often included overlapping zigzags eyes and thorn-like triangles, and placement mattered. For envy, over the heart, where jealousy might strike emotionally, or on the upper back, where people tend to aim envy when you're not looking. Sneaky little emotion, that one. The young tattooist finishes the chest eye motif and begins another, this time near the right shoulder blade. The shape is intricate, but you recognize part of it, the crocodile tail. Here, it's not a strength symbol, it's a shield, a tail lashing back at unseen curses. Historians still argue whether these tattoos were standardized or completely personal. Some show up frequently enough to suggest a common visual vocabulary. Others are one of a kind. You get the feeling it was a mix, like jazz, built on rules but always improvising. As the ink dries, the tattooist reaches for a different tool, a long flat bone with a ridged edge. He uses it not to tattoo, but to press the newly inked lines into the skin, embedding them deeper, firming the intention. It's part ritual, part practical, like stamping a letter before sending it. And here's something you don't expect. The man begins to laugh, not wildly, not nervously, just softly, as though the process, the permanence, has lifted something from him. You hear him say, "Let them try to take this one." It stays with you. Because in a world of lost tokens, misplaced pouches, broken strings, there's something extraordinary about healing and protection that cannot be removed. Not by thieves, not by time, not even by death. You leave the workshop and notice something you hadn't before. Children with tiny tattoos on their wrists. One has a sunburst, another a pair of dots. You're told it's common now, small marks to protect against the evil breath that travels through crowds. Their version of schoolyard germs, perhaps. The tattoos aren't elaborate, but they're real. Even the youngest here grow up understanding that their skin is their story and their shield. And you start to think about everything you carry on the outside. Jewelry, clothes, accessories, all of it temporary, all of it vulnerable. But imagine if your body remembered for you not just what you've survived, but what you're afraid of, what you want to hold close, what you refuse to lose. You run a finger across your collarbone and picture the eye-shaped tattoo still drying on that man's chest. And for the first time in a long while, you wonder, what would you mark if you needed it to never be taken from you? You're wandering through the shaded corridor of a market, now woven mats, forming makeshift ceilings overhead, giving just enough cover from the blistering sun. The scent of dried fish cumin and roasted grains tickles your nose as you pass vendors, hawking amulets, beads, and copper trinkets. But what catches your attention isn't a stall. It's a group of travelers gathered near a low bench, staring at something. Correction, Someone, a Greek trader, pale as goat's milk and clearly new to the Nubian climate, sits shirtless and sweating through his linen wrap. His chest is streaked with red ink, and a local healer is tapping a mark into his upper arm. A translator stands nearby, explaining slowly, with hand gestures, what the symbol means. You pause. This is new, very new. The Greeks weren't known for borrowing medical traditions lightly. They had their own physicians. Thank you very much. Hippocrates, Asclepius, the whole scroll and scalpel crowd. But there he is, a merchant from Mytilene, arms out getting a Nubian healing tattoo. And, according to the translator, it's for heat exhaustion. Apparently, the man had fainted twice while unloading goods and swore off returning until he had a charm more potent than goat's milk. His phrase, "Not yours." The tattoo is a sun spiral, small but tight positioned near the clavicle to keep the fire inside balanced. It's drawn with red ochre and a touch of lizard bile. Yes, you winced too, said to cool the body from within. Quirky, yes. Effective. Well, the man hasn't fainted since. Mainstream historians used to think cross-cultural tattooing didn't happen until much later. But newer findings like this are challenging that. There's evidence that Nubian healing symbols made their way north via traders, mercenaries, and even prisoners of war. Small marks show up in Greco-Roman mummies, sometimes hidden in folds of skin or tucked beneath clothing lines. Historians still argue whether these were actual Nubian tattoos or local imitations, but the influence is undeniable. You edge closer, watching as the healer finishes with a sprinkling of crushed mint and salt over the fresh mark, not just to disinfect, but to lock in the cooling intention. The Greek grimaces, but stays quiet. You can tell he's more embarrassed than in pain. The translator hands him a jar of cooling balm and says, "Don't wash it for 3 days unless you want the sun to get mad again." He nods solemnly, like he's just received a divine warning, and then you hear a phrase that stops you. Another traveler from the Nile Delta murmurs, "I got one too, for my stomach." He rolls up his sleeve to reveal a mark near the elbow crook, 3 dots in a crescent arc, the classic Nubian symbol for digestive alignment. Better than the leeches, he shrugs. You're watching something extraordinary. Medical pluralism, 800 BCE style. While Egyptian healers favored purging and Greek physicians prescribed endless broths and bathhouse routines, here's a system where the skin speaks, where the solution isn't swallowed but inked, and it's spreading. The translator explains that some foreigners get the tattoos out of desperation, others out of curiosity. But a few, they become believers. You hear about a woman from Cyprus who returned every year to get a new mark for each pregnancy. About a Syrian sailor who had a row of dots tattooed down his shins to prevent leg cramps at sea. Some tattoos were meant to last a season, others a lifetime, and once in a while they were done in secret. Apparently, not everyone's homeland approved of tattooing. In certain Greek city-states, tattoos were marks of enslavement or punishment. To return home with an inked chest even for healing could spark scandal. So, travelers began requesting hidden tattoos behind the ear, under the hairline, inside the thigh. Places their healers could find, but no one else could. Historians still debate whether these hidden tattoos were practical medicine or covert rebellion. But one thing is clear: they chose Nubian healing, not because it was flashy, but because it worked. The healer stands now gathering her tools. She glances at the Greek merchant, smiles gently, and says something you don't understand. But the translator laughs and says, "She told him, 'Now you're half fire, half water. Try not to argue with yourself.' You grin. As the crowd disperses, you linger a bit longer, watching the man study his new tattoo in the polished copper of a merchant's tray. He's unsure, proud, a little amused, but not mocking, never mocking. You walk away thinking about how strange and beautiful it is that ideas, especially about healing, don't need permission to travel. They just need pain to meet openness, belief to meet curiosity, and skin, always skin. Because across cultures, across languages, across whole civilizations, one thing stays constant. When the body hurts, we'll try anything to feel better, even if it means letting a stranger draw power into our skin, dot by dot. You find yourself walking through the outskirts of the village, now where the huts are more spaced out, the air quieter, and the goats less judgmental. Here, the patients aren't foreigners or warriors or hopeful mothers. Here, they're the skeptics, the ones who weren't sure tattoos could help, but came anyway, because something else failed first. You're led into a shelter woven with dried reeds, the walls latticed for airflow, the floor covered in soft, packed earth. And there he sits, an older man with gray in his beard and frustration in his posture. His eyes are sharp, his voice curt, and his elbow swollen like a melon. He's tried everything: herbal compresses, clay wraps, goat fat, massages, even fasting. Nothing worked. So now, reluctantly, he's here. You get the sense he's the kind of person who rolls his eyes at moon marks and spirit points. But pain is a persuasive prophet. The healer arrives and doesn't seem remotely fazed by his attitude. She listens, nods, and begins preparing the ink. This is where it gets messy, literally. The mixture today includes soot from burnt carob branches, a dash of termite mound ash, and fermented camel milk. It smells like every bad idea you've ever made in a kitchen. But the healer stirs it patiently, like she's making soup for a spirit. You ask what the termite ash is for. She says, structure. Apparently, termites are sacred engineers. Their mounds are resilient, their tunnels efficient. Ink made with their homes is believed to rebuild what has broken bone ligament pride. Historians still argue whether this is metaphor medicine or myth layered like a parfait. Probably yes to all three. The healer sketches a motif on the man's forearm, a jagged line bordered by 3 parallel arcs. She explains, without being asked that the jagged line is the pain's edge and the arcs are supporters. You realize this isn't just design, it's diagram. Here's something fringe but fascinating. Some scholars believe Nubian tattoo motifs doubled as anatomical cues, meaning they weren't just art about the body. They were art on the body, for the body. The arcs. They mimic the muscles around the joint. The lines. They echo nerve pathways. In essence, the tattoo tells the pain where to go and where to stop. The old man winces with the first tap of the needle, then again and again. But slowly the tension in his shoulders begins to loosen, not because the pain is gone yet, but because something's happening. He's doing something, and sometimes that's enough. The healer hums, not a song, not a chant, just a hum. You recognize it as the same frequency you heard earlier in the midwife's hut. It vibrates subtly in your teeth. You wonder if this sound passed down through generations is a form of sonic medicine. Or maybe it's just calming. Or maybe it makes the termites happy. Nobody knows. As the tattoo takes shape, the old man's gaze softens. His questions change. Will the pain leave tonight? The healer doesn't answer directly. She says, maybe it will get bored and wander off. You hide your smile. It's a better answer anyway. When the ink is finished, she rubs a mixture of oil and pomegranate rind over the mark, then wraps it loosely in linen. She tells him not to look at it until sunrise. The body listens better while dreaming. Quirky detail. Nubian healers believed that healing tattoos worked best during sleep. Patients were told to lie on the side opposite the tattoo to keep the mark awake while the brain rested. It's half medicine, half metaphor, and it makes you wonder how much of modern sleep science would have delighted them. The old man stands. His limp is still there, but lighter. His jaw is unclenched, and as he leaves, you notice something incredible. He doesn't touch the tattoo. Not to scratch, not to examine, not to test. He trusts it now. You remain behind, staring at the tools, the ridged bone, the ink pots, the cloths stained with generations of pain and hope. You think of all the other patients who started like this, doubtful, grimacing, holding out for one last try. And how many walked away, marked not just with ink, but with belief. Because sometimes tattoos weren't the first option. They were the last resort that worked. As you step back into the sun, your own joints creak. Not painfully, just noticeably, like little knocks from within saying, "Hey, remember us." You wonder what symbol would best represent mild creeping age, maybe a spiral of sighs, maybe a line that curves into a shrug. You grin a little, because if healing can be this strange, this poetic, this tangible, maybe pain isn't the villain. Maybe it's just the messenger waiting for someone to pick up the pen. The wind shifts. It comes in from the west, now, dry and grainy, rustling the papyrus plants near the river, and carrying with it the scent of firewood and fermented barley. You've followed a woman with a slight limp down a winding trail lined with discarded palm fibers and goat droppings. She walks fast, but not urgently, like someone who's learned to live with discomfort, but wouldn't mind trading it in for something better. She ducks into a long, low building just outside the main village. You hesitate before following. This, you're told, is the debate hut. It's not what you think. There are no shouting elders or philosophical duels with reed pens. No. This is where healers come when they disagree on how to fix a person. It happens more often than you'd expect. Inside, it's cooler than outside. 3 mats arranged in a triangle. A jar of water in the center. And seated across from each other are 2 tattooists, one young, all angles and energy. The other, old enough that her hair is the color of ash. Her hands weathered into folded maps. Between them lies a patient, a man, thin and quiet, with dark circles under his eyes and a cough that seems to rattle from deep in the chest. The younger healer believes the answer lies in the lungs, a snake motif coiled on the chest tail, over the sternum mouth, open at the shoulder. He explains that the snake draws out poison with each exhale. His tone is confident, maybe too confident. He taps the air with his stylus like he's sketching in thought. The older healer disagrees. She believes the problem is in the gut. The breath is a symptom, she says. The belly is where the imbalance begins. She proposes a spiral low on the abdomen, tethered by 2 forked lines rising toward the ribs. Her words are fewer, but land heavier. Historians still argue whether these disputes were common or formalized. Some suggest Nubian medical practice was hierarchical, elders ruled. Others argue it was fluid, collaborative, case by case. You watch, fascinated, as the 2 healers pause, turn, and look to the patient. He points to his belly. Decision made. The tattoo begins slowly. The stylus carves the spiral first loose at the edges, tightening toward the center. The forked lines follow, one wrapping around the left flank, the other curling under the rib. It looks like a river branching around an island, or a question mark in motion. Here's the quirky part: in Nubian tradition, disagreement among healers wasn't a failure. It was a sign that the body held more than one story. A person could have a true pain and a false pain. Both felt real, but only one needed the ink. The other would fade once the first was seen. The ink used today is mixed with something unusual: dried honeycomb powder and burnt cedar resin. The result smells smoky sweet. It's sticky too, meant to anchor the mark so it doesn't drift. You glance sideways, wondering if that's symbolic or literal, maybe both. As the tapping begins, the older healer hums something different than the others you've heard before, a rising, falling pattern, almost mathematical. You're told it's called the balancing breath. It mimics the rhythm of walking, meant to stabilize organs during recovery. There's a version for the chest, one for the gut, one for the bones. She hums with her whole body like a cello tuned to human need. The patient flinches once, but then he smiles. After the session ends, the young healer doesn't pout or object. He just nods and makes a mark in a long wooden ledger, part logbook, part diary. He records the date, the design, the decision. And this is where it gets weird. Tattooists kept records, not on papyrus, not always on walls, but in their minds, their tools, their rhythms. Some etched symbols into clay tiles stored in jars. Others used call and response chants with apprentices to memorize patterns for specific ailments. One chant went something like, "Spiral at the hip, breath returns. Dots on the back, sleep earns." It rhymes better in Old Nubian. You leave the hut thinking about how healing isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's negotiation between pain and belief, between old knowledge and new instincts. As you step into the fading light, the woman with the limp brushes past you again, this time slower. She pauses, lifts her robe slightly, and shows you a thin row of tiny triangles marching up her ankle. "I let them debate," she says, "but in the end, I chose." You nod, because that's the quiet miracle here. These tattoos weren't forced. They were chosen, thoughtfully, deliberately. Even when the pain screamed, the skin whispered back, "Yes, but mark me where it matters." And isn't that the truest kind of healing? Not the cure handed down, but the one agreed upon. Dusk leans heavy against the village, and the air now feels thick, like it's holding its breath. You sit beneath a fig tree, where a few older women have gathered baskets at their sides, sandals off hands, busy with nothing in particular. One of them, skin like river rock and eyes bright as sunrise, gestures for you to come closer. "You want to know about scars?" she asks. You nod, of course. She points to the back of her hand, 5 raised lines parallel just below the knuckles. Not a tattoo, she says, but not an accident either. Then she rolls up her sleeve and reveals another set, fainter now, but inked a lattice of thin bars wrapping her upper arm with tiny dots cradled between. Here's the revelation. Not all healing tattoos were meant to hide the scar. Some were meant to follow it. In Nubian tradition, scars weren't shameful. They were landmarks. But more than that, they were invitations. A scar was an open thread. The tattoo was the stitch. You learn that when someone suffered a major wound, especially one from illness or childbirth, they would return to the site of the scar months later and complete it with ink. The idea wasn't cosmetic, it was spiritual, physiological, and poetic all at once. The scar showed where the body had fallen. The tattoo, where it had gotten back up. Mainstream historians once thought these combinations were random, but deeper studies have shown repeated patterns, spiral tattoos, intersecting with cesarean scars, sunburst motifs around pox pits, tiny ladders bridging torn ligaments. Some suggest these combinations were designed to trap pain in the damaged area so it wouldn't travel. Others say the ink served to hold the memory in place like a frame around a photograph. And here's something oddly beautiful. The ink was often selected to match the scar, not to cover it, but to blend with it. Ochre for raised keloids, charcoal for smoother lines, ash and milk mixtures for pinker wounds. Tattoos didn't hide the story. They harmonized with it. You're shown one woman's lower back, 4 dots, tattooed above a faint surgical-looking scar. She calls them the sisters, each dot for a baby born. The scar for the one she didn't carry to term. I don't want to forget her, she says softly, but I don't want to ache forever either. It sits with you. Here's a quirky note. There was a belief that certain scars, if left uninked, would invite pain to return. They acted like open doors. Tattooing them closed that door, not physically perhaps, but energetically. You've read enough modern psychology to draw your own conclusions. Call it symbolism. Call it placebo. But even now, there are therapists who describe healing trauma as closing a loop. Nubians, they just did it with ink. Some tattoos were even designed before the wound healed. A person would say, "Mark me now, so when I'm better, I'll remember how bad it was." Others waited years. One woman waited until her husband died. Then she tattooed a tiny raft over her chest scar, the one from where he'd pulled her from a river during a flood. She said it was time to carry herself now. You ask whether men did this too. You're answered by a chuckle. A lean elder with calloused hands holds out his forearm. A wide gash, now old and pale, is wrapped by 4 chevron-shaped lines. He says he got the wound while building a grain shelter in a storm. Lightning struck the structure. He survived. 2 months later, he tattooed the lightning around the scar so the sky would remember who won. And here's the best part. No 2 scar tattoos are exactly the same. They are, by definition, personalized. Your wound, your mark, your story. Historians still argue whether this was therapy or ritual. But as you watch these elders touch their scars with pride, not shame, you realize you don't care what the textbooks say. This was meaningful. And it worked. You ask whether the scars ever fade completely. No, says the first woman, but the pain does. And the story that just grows sharper. Later, as you walk back toward the center of the village, you think of all the scars you've ignored, the ones on your body, the ones beneath. What would it look like to honor them instead of hiding them, to say you happened? You changed me. Now let's draw something beautiful around you. You run your fingers along your wrist, and for the first time the idea of a scar doesn't feel like a flaw. It feels like a frame. Night has fully settled now. The stars no longer blink, they stare. The air has cooled, the drums have quieted, and even the Nile seems to hush its rippling to a low murmur. You're sitting near a low wall at the edge of the village, the clay cool against your back, and your mind is still turning over what you've seen. But the silence doesn't last. Someone sits beside you. No words, just presence. She's tall, her back straight, her arms bare, except for a single striking tattoo. A thick line across her bicep, wrapped with delicate swirls, like vines curling around a staff. You don't have to ask. She speaks before you even gather the courage. "This is not my first," she says, "but it's the one that taught me the most." You listen. She explains that when she was a girl, her grandmother brought her to the healer, not for pain, not for illness, but for discipline. She'd lost her temper in the marketplace, shouted at an elder, broke a basket. Her punishment wasn't shame. It was a tattoo. Not one meant to hurt. Not one meant to protect. One meant to remind. The mark was placed deliberately on the arm she used to lash out. Its meaning was simple control, growth. She says that for a year, every time she raised her arm, she saw it. And eventually, her anger softened. She didn't suppress it. She channeled it. You sit in silence with her for a while, then she gestures toward another figure walking past a man with dozens of small, near-invisible tattoos peppering his chest like freckles. "He had nightmares," she whispers. "They gave him light marks so his skin would know it's safe now." You blink. Light marks, yes. Not all tattoos were meant to be bold. Some were barely visible, drawn with diluted ink, scratched with blunt tools, placed in layers so faint you'd miss them unless the skin caught just the right angle of moonlight. Mainstream historians missed these for decades. Only under infrared light did researchers discover that some Nubian bodies were covered in these ghost tattoos intended for emotional healing, not physical. Marks that whispered rather than shouted. Ink for memory, not visibility. There was one famous example, a young woman buried with no jewelry, no status tokens. But under her ribs, a pattern of soft spirals and dotted lines revealed a history of loss. Her parents had died in a flood. The marks were believed to be grief guards, tattoos placed to catch sorrow before it sunk too deep. Quirky, maybe. But modern trauma therapy would agree with the principle. Name your grief, place it somewhere, give it form. The Nubians just happened to use ink and skin instead of journals and guided breathing exercises. You ask the woman beside you how many marks she's had. 7, she says. 3 for pain, 2 for protection, 1 for memory. She pauses. And 1 just because I wanted to feel beautiful again. You glance at her, the bicep mark, the strong posture, the steady voice. It worked. Here's something often overlooked in scholarship, the emotional reasons for tattoos. Not just healing a fever or a muscle tear, but healing a heartbreak, restoring self-worth, creating closure. One tattooist told a visiting scholar, "If you don't let the heart speak, the stomach will scream." The researcher didn't include that quote in the paper, but you remember it. You think of your own quiet griefs, the ones you stuffed into drawers, locked behind smiles. What mark would you choose to help them breathe? A circle, a single dot, a ladder out of a hole. The woman stands, now dusts off her wrap. She nods toward the river. You should see the dreaming tent before dawn. That's where the best tattoos are made. She's gone before you can ask what she means. But now you're intrigued. You walk toward the riverbank, guided by the lantern glow of fireflies and the soft calls of frogs. Ahead, a conical tent made of layered reeds leans slightly to one side like it's exhaling. Inside, you're told some patients don't speak their pain. They sleep it. And when they dream, the healer watches, listens, and in the morning, tattoos the image they saw. No intake form, no symptoms, just dreams. Historians still argue whether this was real diagnosis or just poetic nonsense. But recent neuroscience shows the dreaming brain mirrors emotional wounds, vividly processing trauma in metaphor, sorting through buried feelings. The Nubians didn't have MRIs, but they had intuition and ink. You don't go in the tent, not yet, but you sit nearby, letting your body rest, letting your mind float. And for the first time, you don't worry whether you're broken. You wonder what your dreams would draw, what patterns would rise to the surface if you let them. And if you did, if you handed them to a healer in the morning, would your body finally feel understood? You wake to soft murmurs and a faint trace of incense on your clothes. The air is cool, the kind that comes just before dawn, when even the river seems to hesitate before returning to motion. Around you, the dreaming tent rustles. Someone stirs inside. You stay seated beneath the reeds, listening. Eventually, the flap lifts. A boy steps out. 12, maybe 13. His cheeks still soft with childhood, but his eyes belong to someone older. He says nothing. He walks straight to the healer, waiting nearby, who already has her ink ready. No words are exchanged. This is it. This is what you were told about, tattooing from the dream. You watch as the healer dips a thin stylus into a jar of pigment. It's bluish gray, made from crushed lapis fig ash and river clay. The color is muted, almost like smoke, and you're told that's intentional. Dream tattoos, they say, must not shout. The design is drawn onto the boy's shoulder, 3 crescent shapes overlapping like wind across water. The healer adds a single dot above each curve. No chant, no humming this time. Just breath, steady, calm. The tapping begins, soft, sparse, like rain that's deciding whether to fall, and then it's done. You ask what the tattoo means. The healer says he saw the wind in his chest. You blink. He had been coughing for weeks, they explain. No other treatments worked. But in the dream, the boy saw wind pulling threads from his ribs, pulling too much. So, the tattoo is meant to tether the wind, keep it close, but not wild. A visual balm for the spirit trapped inside the lungs. Mainstream historians used to scoff at this. Dream diagnosis. Surely that was just mysticism. But more recent studies in cross-cultural medicine have revealed that dream healing is nearly universal. The Zulus, the Hawaiians, the Sami all have forms of it. And now, researchers wonder, did these ancient cultures understand something we forgot? That the subconscious might offer truer symptoms than we can articulate. You watch as the boy touches the new mark gently. He doesn't smile, but he breathes deeper. Later that morning, you meet another patient of the dreaming tent, a widow. Her husband died a year ago, but she still wakes each night expecting to hear his steps. She says the silence is what hurts most. That absence has weight. She dreamed of standing in a dry lake bed, her arms full of fish bones. No water, no sound, just cracked mud and sharp silence. The healer marked her back with a faint outline of a water droplet with lines radiating downward like rain. To remind the body, she says that silence can be filled. You think about all the ways we try to handle grief, and here they give it shape, not to erase it, but to make it containable. Here's a quirky discovery. Some Nubian graves contain individuals with entire constellations of dream tattoos, images that don't match any known healing motif but seem to repeat across multiple burials. Spirals with wings, teardrops encased in triangles, unnamed beasts made of fire and vines. No one knows what they mean, but some archaeologists now believe these were not for healing the body, but for preparing the soul. The dreaming tent then wasn't just a clinic. It was a translator, a place where the deep, murky self whispered through metaphor, and someone nearby listened. You think about your own dreams, the strange, formless symbols that surface without explanation, the forgotten doors, the phantom people. What would a Nubian healer make of those? What would they mark if you handed them your most persistent recurring dream? You don't need to be sick to benefit from being understood. As the sun rises, you follow the healer to her ink station. She sits beside a boy sketching his dream from the night before he saw a lion made of water. It roared without a mouth. It chased him, then laid beside him. She smiles softly. That's a fear that wants to guard you. She sketches a tiny symbol behind his ear, a wave with teeth. You sit in silence, stunned, not by the magic of it, but the precision, the compassion, the idea that maybe your body knows how to ask for what it needs, if only someone takes the time to decode its language. You look at your hands, your arms, still blank, but you wonder, what would your dream look like if it were carved in pigment? What message have you ignored simply because it didn't arrive in a language you were taught to trust? And most haunting of all, what healing have you postponed because no one ever asked your dreams what they wanted? By mid-morning, you're back near the healer's compound. Only now the place is louder, busier, more animated. Children are darting through the narrow footpaths. Women are airing dyed fabrics over thorny bushes, and a group of men gather near the water pots, discussing something in the unmistakable tone of polite disagreement. You catch words like heat in the blood river fever and your favorite sun inside the bones. You've heard these phrases before. They sound poetic, but here they're diagnostic. And as it turns out, you've stumbled into something special, a teaching circle. You slip closer. A healer stands at the center, holding a piece of goat hide inked with patterns. Around her, 4 apprentices squat attentively, styluses in hand, mimicking each stroke in the dust. Today's lesson: how to adjust a tattoo design based on how the body responds. She points to a simple spiral with a line across it, usually drawn over the stomach to soothe spasms. But what if the patient's skin is too thin, she asks, or if the pain travels left instead of right? The apprentices murmur responses. One says, add another spiral beside it. Another, break the line into dots. The healer nods. Good. Now try it. This is where your eyebrows rise, because until now you thought the tattoo patterns were fixed, specific designs for specific ailments. But here, it's clear modification is part of the medicine. Historians now believe Nubian tattooing had more in common with jazz than with rote prescription. There were root forms like scales in music, but what the healer played depended on the patient, their body, their pain, their reaction. One fringe scholar even theorizes that some designs were deliberately left incomplete, meant to evolve with the illness. If a person's symptoms changed, so did the ink. Additions, replacements, reversals. It wasn't failure. It was responsiveness. Your skin was a living record of your body's conversations with time. The healer shows another example. 2 mirrored triangles meant for back pain, but she explains if the patient sleeps curled, the mark will warp. So you place it on the side instead. Her apprentices nod, scribbling in the dirt. You wonder if medical students today would be allowed to diagram in dust and still be taken seriously. Here's a quirky bit: some tattooists even took the weather into account. A person tattooed during high wind was thought to hold the ink better. Others believed healing was faster when the marks were made just before a storm. The pressure, the wind, the scent of coming rain, it all became part of the prescription. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or an early form of environmental medicine. Either way, you wouldn't be surprised to see a Nubian healer double-check the sky before choosing her ink. You follow one apprentice after class. She's no more than 16, but already has 2 marks of her own, tiny mirrored lines on either side of her neck. She tells you they're for voice, that she had lost hers as a child after a fever, and these were given to help it return. It worked, she says, shrugging. Her voice is soft but steady. You ask if she plans to become a full healer. I already am, she says. My hand just needs time to catch up. That line stays with you because it reminds you that in this world, learning was doing, practicing, adjusting. Every scar, every error, every improvisation, part of the training. You return to the compound later that afternoon, where the healer now reviews past tattoos, checking for fade, checking for result. One patient lies on a mat while she inspects a set of dots near his ribs. She presses lightly. He winces. She frowns. Then, without ceremony, she taps 2 new lines beside the old ones. Just like that. You realize here, a tattoo isn't a conclusion. It's an opening statement. Healing isn't a single act. It's a relationship between body and ink. Healer and mark, past and present. And the design must keep pace with the pain. You touch your shoulder lightly. Think of every time you've dismissed a small ache. Every time you said, "I'll deal with that later." You wonder if you had a healer like this near you, would you have listened earlier? Would you already be carrying the shapes your body once asked for? If only someone had shown you how. The healer's voice carries across the courtyard. She tells the apprentices, "Never trust a pattern that cannot bend." And just like that, you realize this isn't just about tattoos. It's about life. The village is quieter again now. The heat has folded itself into the earth, and the sun droops low, throwing amber shadows across every wall and face. You find yourself in a courtyard, shaded by tall reeds, watching something that feels both ancient and strangely familiar. A woman sits on a low stool wrapping a patient's wrist with cloth. But she's not a healer in the way you've seen before. She doesn't mix ink. She doesn't chant. Her job, you're told, is different. She is the ink master. In Nubia, there were tattooists. And then there were shapers of ink, a rare kind of artisan, equal parts, doctor, calligrapher, and philosopher. Their job, to mark the skin with precision so deliberate that every stroke carries intent. You meet one now. Her name is Sarta. She has no visible tattoos, which surprises you until you understand she's not unmarked. She's simply marked where you can't see. She places designs on others like a sculptor carving into sandstone, slow, precise, and with immense focus. Her ink kit is unlike the others you've seen. The styluses are carved from obsidian, shaped into flat wedges and narrow needles. There's a bowl made of fired clay filled with a dark syrupy mixture, blackened pomegranate rind, goat's blood soot from burned cedar and powdered jasper. She stirs it with a thin silver spoon. Yes, silver, because she explains ink absorbs memory and metal remembers truth. You blink at that, but say nothing. Her patient today is a man who's returning after years away, a merchant once strong now with shaking hands and a bowed spine. He says little, just points to his lower back. The pain, he says, won't go away. Sarta doesn't nod or answer. She places her hand just above the spot, closes her eyes, and waits. For what? Breath pulse permission. Then, with a small blade, she etches 3 parallel lines, not deep, but slow. She doesn't rush. She watches the skin, as if it's responding. And that's when you realize she's not tattooing on the skin. She's tattooing with it. Each mark reacts. The tissue shifts. The color rises. She adds dots, 6 of them slanted like falling rain. Then she rubs the area with a cloth, soaked in warmed wine and ashes. You ask hesitantly what it means. She replies without looking up. It tells the body that the root of pain has been heard. That's the whole answer. She doesn't claim it will work, doesn't promise anything. She offers the body an invitation to respond, to release, to recalibrate. Historians now believe this was the foundation of what we might call biofeedback. The skin responds to pain. Ink marks it. The body sees it. The body adjusts. Quirky note. Some Nubian ink master records refer to this as skin speaking back, a phrase that confounded early archaeologists. But today, we understand how the nervous system responds to sensory cues, how the body sometimes only needs the suggestion of correction to initiate healing. They knew that. Without journals, without scans, just ink and silence. Sarta finishes the final tap. She cleans the skin, then covers it with a cloth made from woven flax soaked in aloe. The man doesn't thank her. He just exhales, a sound you didn't know a spine could make. You stay after he leaves. She lets you look at her tools. Each stylus is marked, not with labels, with patterns. She doesn't categorize by thickness or sharpness. She categorizes by purpose. The triangle-tipped one is for deep memory. The curved wedge is for grief. The narrow point, wandering illnesses, she says. You ask if she always uses the same shapes for the same things. She smiles. No, the shapes change. The body teaches me what it wants. And there it is again, that principle. Healing not as declaration, but as dialogue. You ask if she ever marks herself. She lifts her sleeve. There, along the inside of her upper arm, is a tiny set of dots, just 3 encased in a crescent arc, barely visible. You lean in. She says, for doubt. Sometimes I carry too much of others. You nod. You felt that too. And suddenly it all makes sense. These ink masters weren't just technicians. They were translators. They didn't fix the body. They gave it language, gave pain a place to rest, gave illness a name it could answer to. You stand now quieter inside than you were before, because you understand something. Maybe healing doesn't always require an answer. Maybe it just requires being seen. And if all you have is ash and wine and skin, maybe that's enough. It's just before midnight now. The village has curled into itself, the fires reduced to soft embers, the conversations thinned into the hush of breathing. Even the animals have stilled. You're walking alone beneath a sky that feels impossibly large. Stars scattered like old ash across black silk. And then, in the distance, a flicker of light. You follow it. At the edge of the fields, beneath a low crescent moon, you find a woman kneeling beside a small fire. She is alone, Her robes loose her head uncovered. But what catches your eye is not the flame. It's what she's doing. She's tattooing herself. A bowl of ink beside her, a sharpened thorn in her hand, a small mirror propped against a rock. You freeze, afraid to interrupt, but she looks up and smiles. "Come," she says without pause. It hurts less with a witness. You do not sit. You settle. Slowly, carefully, like you're afraid you might break whatever sacred spell you've just walked into. She continues her work, inking a line around her wrist. It's a ring of dashes uneven in width, but somehow balanced. You ask softly what it's for. "To remember," she replies, "who I was before they forgot me." You wait. She tells you her story without shame. Once a healer, trusted, respected. But after a mistaken infection that claimed a child's leg, she lost her place. Not punished, exactly. Just not called upon anymore. And that silence hurt more than the loss. So tonight she gives herself a mark no one else will, not for protection, not for pain, but for returning. Mainstream historians almost never discuss self-tattooing in Nubian culture. It's rarely documented, rarely preserved. But in the quiet corners of oral history, there are stories of healers, mothers, widows, and warriors who, when no one else could help them, turned the needle inward, not out of vanity, not out of rebellion, but out of a deep and aching desire to exist again. The fire crackles. She dips the thorn again. This time, she marks a curve over her heart. One arc, then a second, mirroring it. You recognize the motif it's used to anchor dreams in place, but she's not asleep. She explains. When you've been forgotten, your dreams leave first, then your voice, then your feet. You stay quiet, because in this moment, she isn't tattooing skin. She's tattooing truth. And here's the strange, beautiful, heartbreaking thing. Many of these solitary tattoos were never meant to be seen. They were hidden in folds, along the scalp, behind knees, under breasts, the intimate places that hold memory like dust in the corners, not for shame, but for privacy, for survival. Quirky fact. Some tattooists carried small pieces of charcoal in pouches sewn inside their clothes, not to sell, not to offer, but for themselves, just in case. An emergency mark, a quick sentence, a moment of "I still am" in the face of "I'm no longer seen." You ask her if the ink always works. She smiles. Not always. But the silence is louder without it. When she finishes, she holds her wrist over the smoke, not to seal the wound, but to bless the mark. The smoke carries the ink's meaning upward, and with it, the pain. She turns to you. What would you tattoo? She asks if you didn't need anyone's permission. You don't answer. You don't have to. She nods, as if she's heard your unspoken reply. Anyway. You walk back alone the path, lit only by the slow burn of your thoughts. The idea of marking your own body without fanfare, without ceremony, just because something in you needs to be named, lingers. You think about every quiet ache that didn't get treated, every mistake that didn't get forgiven, every version of yourself that slipped through the cracks while life moved forward. And maybe, just maybe, this is what those ancient Nubians understood best. That healing isn't always granted. Sometimes you have to carve it. The final morning arrives not with a rush of color, but with a soft, golden breath. The sky above Nubia stretches wide and pale, the kind of light that makes everything feel hushed, like the world hasn't quite woken up yet. You stand at the edge of the river, watching water ripple around your ankles. It's cool, grounding. Today you've been invited to observe one last ritual. It's not dramatic, no chants, no fire, just the simple, deliberate act of preparing a body for the long road ahead. A woman lies on a woven mat, her breathing steady, her eyes closed, not from death, but from choice. She is leaving. Not this world, not yet, but this place, this village. Her time here is finished. Her sons have grown. Her husband's ashes rest in the family urn. She has chosen to walk alone to the distant hills, where her sister waits to greet her at a different shore. Before she goes, she asks for a final mark. The healer who arrives is the one you met. On your first day, the priestess with soot-dark arms and eyes like polished obsidian. She kneels. She does not ask why. She already knows. The ink today is made from crushed lavender ash goat's milk and a single drop of the woman's own blood. The mark, a small spiral, not on the chest, not on the hand, but on the foot. It's for the path the healer murmurs to remind her where she's been. The tattooing is slow, gentle, less pressure, less bite. And when the spiral is complete, the healer adds 3 dots beside it: past, present, becoming. Historians don't always record these kinds of marks. They're small, hidden, sometimes washed away by the sands of time. But every now and then, archaeologists find a foot bone stained faintly blue, a heel with ink embedded in the skin. A story of departure, not illness. You sit quietly as the woman rises. She walks barefoot across the village one final time, and no one stops her. No one asks questions. She is not escaping. She is concluding. And you understand now, tattooing in Nubia wasn't only about curing what was broken. It was about completing what had begun, about naming what had been endured, and honoring what had already healed. You think of all the marks you have witnessed: spirals, dots, crocodiles, ladders. You've seen ink carry pain, grief, protection, dreams. You've seen bodies used as maps, as letters, as prayers. And more than anything, you've seen one truth over and over. A tattoo was never just a design. It was a decision to listen to pain instead of ignore it, to believe that the body knows what it needs, to speak to the soul through the skin. And now as the wind picks up slightly and carries the scent of wet clay, you look down at your own arms, still bare, and you smile. Not because you're missing something, but because perhaps for the first time you're ready to ask your body the right question, not what's wrong with you, but what would you like me to remember? The fire burns low now. The wind softens. The sky above Nubia has faded into a quiet, endless blue. You're no longer standing. You're resting. On woven blankets beneath the shade of fig trees, your breath steady, your muscles loose. You feel the phantom prickle of a needle that never touched your skin. The weight of stories you've collected without ever lifting a stylus. The rhythm of breath, the hush of river water, the warmth of a sun that no longer scorches it, all blends together now like ink dissolving into cloth. Let it sink in. The idea that your pain was never weakness, that your scars, visible or not, were never mistakes, that your body with all its aches and quiet asks is wiser than you were taught to believe. Maybe there's no healer nearby with goat milk ink and spiral motifs. But maybe you don't need one. Maybe it's enough to listen, to pause, to draw your own marks, not with pigment, but with presence. A deep breath, a whispered truth, a hand resting gently over a spot that once hurt and now simply remembers. Let that be your tattoo tonight. Invisible, but real. Now breathe. Let your shoulders sink. Let the day fade behind you like a faint dot on a long spiral. You are marked now with story, with softness, with something older than time and kinder than silence. You can sleep now. You're safe. You're seen. You're still here.